March 26, 1997. A 911 call leads police to a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. What they find inside shocks the entire world. 39 bodies, all dressed the same, all wearing matching black and white sneakers, all lying neatly in rows, and every single one of them believed they weren't dying. They believed they were boarding a spaceship, hiding behind a comet. But this story doesn't begin with aliens. It begins with two people searching for answers, and a belief so powerful that dozens would eventually leave behind their families, careers, identities, and ultimately their lives. This is the story of Heaven's Gate, one of the strangest, most fascinating, and most tragic cults in modern history. The early 1970s were a strange time in America. The Vietnam War, political scandals, a growing distrust of institutions, and an explosion of interest in spirituality. People experimented with meditation, psychics, astrology, Eastern religions, and increasingly UFOs. Millions wondered whether humanity was alone in the universe.
In your silent sky, we've always known. Through the dark, you're not alone. Every call you send, we've heard. Now the night returns your word.
Into this atmosphere stepped a man named Marshall Applewhite. At first glance, Applewhite didn't seem like the future leader of a UFO cult. He was educated and a former music professor. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, so he was deeply religious. Yet beneath the surface, his life was falling apart. By the early 1970s, Applewhite was experiencing a profound personal and spiritual crisis. His career was unraveling. His marriage had unfortunately collapsed, and his sense of purpose had disappeared. He soon began to believe that God wanted something more from him. Something extraordinary, but he didn't yet know what. Then he met a woman who would change everything. This woman was Bonnie Lou Nettles. She was a nurse, a mother, and someone deeply involved in mysticism, astrology, and spiritual teachings. Their meeting would become the foundation of Heaven's Gate. The connection between Applewhite and Nettles was immediate. They spent hours discussing religion, prophecy, mysticism, and the meaning of life. These shared interests made their connection special. Nettles claimed she was communicating with higher spiritual forces. Applewhite brought his deep knowledge of Christianity. Together, they began creating an entirely new worldview. And slowly, their beliefs became more radical. They concluded something extraordinary. They came up with the idea that the Bible wasn't describing angels. It wasn't describing heaven, but it was describing extraterrestrials. In their view, beings from another world had visited Earth throughout history, and humans had mistaken them for gods. They came to the conclusion that the stories of Christianity were actually stories about advanced alien beings. So they assumed Jesus was one of these aliens and that he was an extraterrestrial messenger. And angels, they were extraterrestrial visitors, and heaven was just a higher evolutionary level of existence. Then came an even more shocking belief. Applewhite and Nettles became convinced that they themselves had a special role in the end times. They believed they were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation. According to biblical prophecy, the two witnesses would appear before the end of the world. They would teach humanity, then die, then rise again. Applewhite and Nettles truly believed they were those figures. Literally. In 1975, the pair began holding public meetings. They advertised in newspapers and put up flyers. They invited curious people to hear their message. At first, attendees expected discussions about spirituality. Instead, they heard something astonishing. They were told that Earth was about to be recycled and destroyed, and that only those who prepared themselves would survive. They told them a spacecraft would soon arrive, and those who were ready would ascend to what they called the next level. The audience reaction was mixed. Of course, many laughed. Some walked out, but not everyone. A surprising number stayed to listen. And then from that group, some became completely devoted. One of the biggest myths about cults is that only foolish people join them, but the truth is often much more complicated. Many of Heaven's Gate followers were intelligent. They weren't necessarily looking for aliens, but for certainty, for purpose, meaning, and community. Applewhite and Nettles offered all of those things, and they offered something else, a cosmic mission. Followers were told that they were chosen and special, and that they were a part of humanity's next evolutionary step. As commitment deepened, sacrifices increased, and members were encouraged to leave behind families, careers, possessions, romantic relationships, and old identities. The goal was complete transformation. Earthly attachments were viewed as obstacles, and anything tying someone to ordinary human life had to go. Followers traveled across the country with Applewhite and Nettles, living communally, moving constantly, while waiting for the spacecraft that would take them away. Then something happened. Nothing. This spaceship that they promised the people never arrived. Their prophecy failed, and normally this should have destroyed the movement. But Heaven's Gate survived. But why? Because Applewhite and Nettles adapted. They told their followers that since the spacecraft hadn't failed to arrive, that meant the followers simply weren't ready yet. So the mission continued, and many believers stayed. Over the next decade, Heaven's Gate became increasingly isolated, and the members adopted strict rules. No sex, no romantic relationships, no personal ambitions, no individual identity. They even worked to eliminate ordinary human desires. Many members changed their names. They dressed similarly and spoke similarly, and even trained themselves to think of their bodies as temporary containers. Not who they truly were. Who they really were, they believed, was something far greater. They truly grew to believe they were future beings of the next level. Applewhite soon became obsessed with overcoming human desires, especially sexuality. He increasingly taught that transcending humanity meant eliminating all sexual identity, so the group moved toward an almost monastic lifestyle. Followers believed they were preparing to become genderless beings beyond ordinary human existence. Then came a devastating blow. In 1985, Bonnie Nettles died of cancer. And of course, this created a massive problem. For years, Applewhite and Nettles had taught that they would ascend together. But Nettles died like any ordinary human. No spaceship, no miraculous rescue, no visible sign from the next level. Their followers faced a crisis. Had everything been wrong? This moment could have ended Heaven's Gate forever instead. Applewhite reinvented the theology. Applewhite declared that Nettles had completed her mission, and that she had simply gone ahead first. He made it seem like her death wasn't a contradiction, but that it was proof. Proof that she had entered the next level before the others. From this point on, Applewhite's teachings became increasingly focused on leaving the physical body behind. Death was no longer merely possible, it became part of the path. By the 1990s, Heaven's Gate entered a surprising new chapter. They moved this movement to the internet. While many people barely understood the web, Heaven's Gate embraced it. The members became skilled web designers. They built websites, ran computer businesses, and used the technology to spread their message. Ironically, one of history's most famous UFO cults became remarkably tech-savvy. Their website promised information about humanity's transformation, and incredibly, that website still exists today. Then, in 1995, astronomers discovered Hale-Bopp. It would become one of the brightest comets seen in decades. It was visible across the world. To most people, it was a beautiful astronomical event, but to Applewhite, it was a sign. Rumors spread that an unidentified object might be traveling near the comet. Scientists rejected the claim, but Applewhite embraced it. The object, he believed, was a spacecraft. The spacecraft. The very one Heaven's Gate had been waiting on for more than 20 years. Applewhite now taught that Earth was nearing the end and that the spacecraft was waiting. But there was one final requirement. They could not board in their human bodies, because they believed their bodies were merely vehicles. So, to reach the next level, they would have to leave those containers behind. For followers who had spent years hearing this message, the idea no longer seemed shocking. It felt logical, the culmination of everything they believed. In March 1997, the group prepared. They recorded farewell videos. Many appeared happy and excited even. They believed they were about to finally graduate from Earth. Their language reflected years of conditioning. Over several days in March 1997, the members carried out their final act. When authorities eventually entered the mansion, they found 39 dead, including Applewhite himself. The scene was haunting. The bodies were arranged neatly, covered with purple cloths, and dressed almost identically. This event became one of the most infamous mass deaths in modern American history. Nearly 3 decades later, Heaven's Gate continues to fascinate people. Not because of the UFOs, not because of the comet, but because of the deeper question. How do intelligent people come to believe extraordinary things? Today, the story remains a powerful reminder of how deeply humans seek meaning, purpose, belonging, and certainty, and how dangerous those needs can become when placed in the hands of someone claiming to possess absolute truth.